My fiancé wants to be added to my mortgage, title of home. But he is not putting any money down because all he has right now is massive debt. I still remember the day I met Jake, and how he walked into my life with an ease that felt reassuring. Almost familiar, right from the start. At 26, I had just moved into a new position that required all of my attention. Juggling client meetings, proposals, and new responsibilities. Jake, with his warm smile and grounded energy, had become my anchor. He was supportive in a way that allowed me to keep pushing forward. We had a great connection, and we built a bond that grew from friendship to romance, rooted in shared goals and respect. Now, 3 years later, Jake and I were on the brink of something bigger, a commitment. A life together. This past year, we'd taken another huge step by getting engaged. I felt ready, excited even, to build a future with him. But while our connection had grown over the years, our financial situations couldn't have been more different. The fact was, I was in a stable position and on the path to financial security. And he was still finishing up his master's degree, weighed down by a substantial student loan balance. At 26, I'd been through years of diligent saving, investing in my career, and making smart financial choices to reach the place I was in today. I'd always been cautious about my future, poring over my finances and setting goals. Buying a house was one of the biggest. This year, that dream had come within reach. I'd saved enough for a down payment, and with some money pulled from my retirement account, I was ready to put down roots. Literally and figuratively. Jake's financial situation was, understandably, much different. He'd just turned 29 and was about to finish his master's. But he was burdened by a student debt load that felt daunting. He'd been honest about his finances from the start, admitting that he hadn't had the financial stability I'd worked hard for. But I saw him as hardworking and ambitious, genuinely committed to building a career after school and taking control of his financial future. It wasn't his fault he was carrying so much debt, and I admired his determination to improve his situation. As we planned our lives together, buying a home became more than just a dream, it was an impending reality. After a year of searching, I'd found a house that ticked every box, a place where we could create new memories together, where we could settle into a life that truly felt ours. I felt this incredible sense of pride as I signed off on the loan. Visualizing the life we would build, I saw this as a place that would be ours. But I also recognized that it was my investment. I was pulling from my own retirement savings for the down payment. And I'd be taking on the mortgage alone. Given Jake's financial situation, initially, I assumed Jake would be on board with me taking sole ownership of the house. At least for now. After all, with his debt-to-income ratio, adding him to the mortgage wasn't feasible without raising the interest rate or impacting our loan terms. Besides, the mortgage payments, utilities, and maintenance expenses would fall solely on my shoulders. Given that reality, it seemed practical, even logical, for the house to be in my name until his financial situation stabilized. I thought this was an easy decision, one that wouldn't require much discussion. But as we discussed the details of moving in, Jake voiced his discomfort with the idea. He felt strongly that he should be on the title and mortgage, seeing it as a matter of principle and partnership. To him, it symbolized being a team, an acknowledgement of the life we were committing to together. He brought it up over dinner one night, his face shifting from hopeful to disappointed as I explained my reservations. I told him it wasn't personal, it was a practical decision that I believed would protect both of us. But he didn't see it that way. It surprised me, to be honest, how hurt he was by my decision. I had always assumed that we both understood our financial disparity and the need to be cautious. After all, I'd spent years building this foundation, making sacrifices to reach the level of security I had now. I wasn't about to risk that. I loved Jake wholeheartedly and believed in his potential. But I needed the assurance that I was protecting my investments, especially with the uncertainties in his financial life. Jake's disappointment, however, was more than I expected. He took it as a sign that I didn't fully see him as my partner, that I somehow viewed our relationship as something separate from my personal financial decisions. He argued that not putting him on the title was a lack of commitment to our future as a team. He pointed out that I'd always described us as equals, as partners, and that this felt like a contradiction to him. I could tell he felt marginalized, reduced to someone who wasn't trusted to be part of our biggest milestone. Sitting there, watching him struggle to process his feelings, I started to question myself. Had I missed something? Was I really putting up walls between us? I tried to reassure him, explaining that this was purely about protecting myself financially, especially given the years I'd spent building up my retirement savings and paying down my own debt. But my words seemed to fall short. He kept coming back to the same point. If we're a team, shouldn't this house be ours? His words left me with a knot in my stomach. Here I was, finally at the point where I could make my dream of homeownership a reality. Yet this decision, which felt so logical to me, was creating a rift between us. I didn't want this house to symbolize a divide. I wanted it to be a symbol of stability, a place we could both find comfort and security. But in Jake's eyes, it seemed like a symbol of exclusivity, a boundary I was drawing that shut him out. The conversation ended that night without a clear resolution. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, knowing that the very home I had imagined as our future together was instead causing friction in our relationship. And while I tried to focus on the practicality of my decision, Jake's reaction planted a seed of doubt in my mind. The next few days after our initial discussion about the mortgage and title felt tense. Jake grew quieter, more reserved, and I knew he was still struggling with what I'd said. I didn't want to keep rehashing the same arguments, but there was a heaviness between us that I couldn't ignore. So, on a quiet Saturday morning over coffee, I decided to bring it up again, hoping we could find a middle ground. Jake, I can tell this is still bothering you, I said, keeping my tone soft but direct. He looked up from his coffee, his face a mixture of hurt and frustration. Of course it's bothering me, Lisa, he replied, putting his cup down. You're talking about buying a home for us, but the way you're handling it makes me feel like it's just for you. I don't get it. If we're planning a future together, why are you keeping me out of this? It's not about keeping you out, I said, choosing my words carefully. This isn't about our relationship, it's about my financial security. I've spent years saving for this moment, making sure I had something solid to rely on. You know how much I've sacrificed to be able to afford a house. And it's not like I'm excluding you. I want you to live there. And I want us to build a life there. I'm just trying to protect what I've worked so hard for. But don't you see how that sounds? He replied, his voice rising slightly. You're saying it's not about us, but it is. We're supposed to be partners. And partners don't draw lines like this. I know I can't put in money right now, but I'm your fiancé. That should count for something, right? Hearing him say it like that stung. And for a moment, I was at a loss for words. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that he wasn't intentionally trying to guilt me, but rather trying to make sense of a situation that felt personal to him. And maybe it was personal, just not in the way he thought. I get that, Jake. I really do, I said, trying to steady my voice. But you also have to understand that this isn't just a symbolic gesture for me. Adding you to the title and mortgage would mean changing the entire financial setup. Your debt-to-income ratio would make our mortgage interest rate go up. That could affect our future borrowing potential. It's not just about you or me, it's about the numbers and making sure we're being smart. He leaned back, rubbing his temples, clearly trying to process everything I was saying. After a long pause, he finally spoke. So, because I have debt, I'm somehow a financial liability? You really think my debt is more important than our commitment to each other? It was hard not to feel frustrated. He wasn't getting it, and I didn't know how to explain it any clearer. It's not that I think your debt is more important than our relationship, I said, emphasizing each word. It's just a practical matter. You're finishing school, and we both know your situation is going to change once you're able to start your career. But right now, I'm the one with the means to make this happen. Can't we just agree to work together, even if it means I have to handle the financial side for now? He shook his head, looking defeated. I hear what you're saying, Lisa, but it doesn't feel like we're on the same team. I've never cared that you make more money than me, or that you're the one footing the bill for a lot of things. But with something this big, I thought we'd be partners in it. Instead, It feels like you're protecting yourself from me." The words hung heavy in the air, and I felt a pang of guilt twist in my chest. Was I in some way protecting myself from him? I'd never thought of it like that. To me, it was purely practical, ensuring that everything I'd worked for was safeguarded. But Jake saw it differently. To him, not being on the title or mortgage was more than a financial exclusion. It was a signal that I didn't fully trust him. "Jake, it's not about protecting myself from you," I said softly, hoping to bridge the gap between us. "I trust you completely. You know that. I just don't want to put us in a situation that could be risky. This house is supposed to be our foundation. But if something went wrong, I don't want us both to be financially hurt." He looked away, nodding but clearly still hurt. I don't understand why you're so focused on the what ifs. If we're really committed to each other, shouldn't we be in this together? Fully?" I wanted to tell him that my commitment was unwavering, that I wasn't going anywhere, and that this house was meant to be our shared home. But deep down, I realized that for Jake, being added to the title was more than just a matter of legal ownership. It was his way of feeling like an equal partner, a member of this team we were building. To him, my reluctance was a rejection of that partnership, a subtle way of drawing a line that said, "This is mine." But even though I understood his perspective, I couldn't ignore the practical side. This was my financial stability on the line, a future I'd been carefully constructing for years, and the thought of compromising that, even for love, was something I wasn't ready to accept. "I get it, Jake," I finally said, trying to find a way to meet him halfway. "I understand that you want to feel like this is ours, not just mine, but we have to be realistic. Once you're done with school and you're settled in your career, we can revisit this conversation. Maybe there will come a time when adding you to the title makes more sense. But for now, I need you to trust that I'm doing this for both of us." He looked down at his coffee cup, swirling the contents absently before setting it aside. "So, I just have to wait until I'm financially stable to be treated like your partner?" I opened my mouth to respond but didn't have a clear answer. I wanted to say, no, but I realized that, in his eyes, that was exactly what I was implying. We sat there, both of us staring at the table, lost in our own thoughts. I could feel the weight of his disappointment, and it was taking a toll on me. But I still believed in the practicality of my decision, and I wasn't ready to compromise that for the sake of soothing his hurt feelings. As we cleared the table, a silence settled over us, filled with unspoken questions and simmering frustration. I knew this was far from over, and I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was a deeper issue at play, one that wasn't just about titles or mortgages. It was about us, and the delicate balance of love, trust, and independence that defined our relationship. And as much as I wanted to move forward, I couldn't ignore the fact that we were standing on uneven ground. The next week was a delicate dance of half-spoken words and lingering tension. Every conversation between Jake and me felt like a minefield, and I found myself retreating more and more into my thoughts. But the more I withdrew, the more isolated he seemed to feel, and the cycle continued, drawing an invisible line down the center of our relationship. It wasn't long before he brought it up again, and this time, I could see the frustration spilling over. We were sitting on the couch, catching up on a show, but his attention wasn't on the screen. He kept shifting, glancing my way, and finally, he muted the TV. "We need to talk about this, Lisa," he said, voice quiet but firm. "This house, this whole thing, it's not just going to disappear if we ignore it. I'm still feeling like there's this wall between us, and I don't know what to do about it." I sighed, feeling the familiar weight settle over me. I didn't want to hurt him, but I couldn't ignore the practical considerations either. "Jake, I'm not trying to shut you out. It's just complicated. The reality is, I'm the one who's financially able to make this happen right now. I want this to be our home. But the legal and financial side of things doesn't change just because we love each other." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the floor. "It just feels like you're saying you don't see us as a team. And I don't get it. Lisa, I know you're the one paying for this place right now. But we're engaged. Doesn't that mean anything? Doesn't that mean we're partners?" "Of course it does," I replied, feeling the frustration creep into my voice. I've always seen us as a team. I pay for most of our vacations, groceries, rent. I even covered my own engagement ring. It's not like I haven't been carrying a lot of weight for both of us. This house isn't any different. I'm doing it because I want us to have a place to grow together. To make memories. But that doesn't mean I'm going to put myself in a risky situation. Jake. He sat up, visibly bristling. So that's it? I'm a risk to you? I took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. No, that's not what I'm saying. But you have to admit, financially, things aren't balanced between us right now. You're finishing school, and you have debt. This is just the reality of where we are. It's not a judgment on you as a person or as my fiancé. But that's exactly what it feels like, he said, his voice tinged with bitterness. It feels like you don't trust me to be there for you. Like you think that if I'm on the mortgage or the title, I'll somehow ruin everything you've built. Jake, that's not fair, I said, feeling my defenses rising. I've worked hard to get to where I am. I've made sacrifices. I've planned carefully. And this isn't just a love decision for me. This is my financial future, too. I'm just asking you to understand that. He shook his head, leaning back against the couch, arms crossed. You know, I thought love meant trusting each other completely. But it feels like you're only willing to trust me with everything except what matters most to you. His words stung. I hadn't thought of it like that. But hearing it out loud made me wonder if maybe he was right. Maybe my hesitation was about more than just finances. Maybe it was about trust, too. But I wasn't sure how to explain to him that my hesitation came from a lifetime of carefully crafted independence. A mindset that didn't just dissolve the moment we got engaged. I do trust you, I said, almost pleadingly. I trust you completely. But I also trust myself. I know what I'm comfortable with. And I know what I need to feel secure. This doesn't mean I don't love you or that I don't want to build a life with you. It just means that I'm trying to protect what I've worked for. He shook his head, clearly unsatisfied with my answer. So, what? I'm just supposed to accept that I'll always be the one on the outside, looking in? That no matter what, I'll never be an equal in this relationship? That's not what I'm saying, I replied, exasperated. You know it isn't. But right now, the circumstances are what they are. I'm just asking you to respect that. But it's not just circumstances, Lisa. It's about how you see us. I don't need the house to be mine financially. But I need to feel like we're a team. And right now, you're making it clear that we're not. At least, not in a way that feels meaningful to me. He stood up, pacing across the living room, clearly wrestling with the weight of the situation. You say you see us as equals, as partners. But when it comes down to it, you're the one making all the calls. You get to decide what's financially smart, what's safe, what's best. I don't have a say in anything that matters. I watched him, feeling a mix of guilt and frustration building. He wasn't wrong, I was making the decisions. But wasn't that my right? I'd earned the money, put in the years, built the foundation that was now giving us a chance at stability. But in his eyes, that meant I was excluding him. Shutting him out of the biggest commitment we were supposed to make together. Jake, I'm not trying to undermine you, I said, standing up to face him. But it feels like you're ignoring everything I've done to make this work. You're saying you don't feel like an equal. But look at everything I've contributed. I've been supporting us for years. Making sacrifices. Giving more. It's not that I don't want you as a partner. I'm just being realistic. But that's just it, he said, his voice growing louder. You're only realistic about the parts that benefit you. You don't care that this makes me feel like I'll never measure up. That I'll always be behind. I felt a surge of frustration. The pressure of his words pushing against the boundaries I'd set for myself. This isn't about you measuring up. It's about making sure we're secure. That we're building something sustainable. I'm trying to protect us. Jake, protecting my investment is protecting our future. He scoffed, running a hand through his hair. Your investment. That's exactly it, isn't it? This is your investment, not ours. I'm just along for the ride. Until I can magically fix my finances and finally be worthy of being your equal. He turned away, and I felt the weight of his words settle heavily on my shoulders. I wanted to reach out, To say something that would bridge the growing gap between us. But I didn't know what else to say. I felt stuck between my love for him and the practical decisions that had guided me this far. After a tense silence, he looked back at me. His face softer but still hurt. You know, Lisa, I always thought that being with you meant we'd face everything together. I didn't think you'd see me as a liability. I thought you'd see me as someone worth investing in. Just like I see you. He left the room, and I was left standing there. The silence wrapping around me like a cold fog. I felt torn in two. Unable to reconcile my love for him with the practical concerns that seemed to cast a shadow over everything we'd built. I knew he wasn't wrong in his feelings. In his eyes, I was drawing a line. A boundary that kept him at arm's length from the life we were supposed to share. But as much as I wanted to ignore it, I couldn't shake the practicality that had guided me for so long. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was making a mistake. Jake's words replayed in my mind, each one digging a little deeper, forcing me to confront the possibility that I was holding him at a distance. I hadn't meant to make him feel like he didn't belong. But the reality was, I did feel a sense of ownership over the things I'd worked so hard to achieve. I wasn't ready to give that up, not yet. But I also knew that if I couldn't find a way to meet him halfway, I risked losing more than just his presence in the house. I risked losing the love we'd built, the future we'd dreamed of, the partnership I'd always wanted. And for the first time, I wondered if the price of my independence was worth it. In the days that followed, I felt caught in a fog of indecision and guilt, haunted by Jake's words. Every time I replayed the argument in my mind, I started seeing things from a new angle, one that made me question if I'd been too stubborn or blinded by my own ambitions. Jake's hurt wasn't just about money or titles on a mortgage. It was about feeling like an outsider in the life we were supposed to share. And the more I thought about it, the harder it became to ignore the compromises I'd made to support him over the years. In ways that had always felt natural, even easy. For the first few years of our relationship, it hadn't bothered me that I covered most expenses. Nor did I mind taking care of the little things that made our lives easier. It felt right. He was doing his best to work through school. And I had a stable income. It seemed only fair. Vacations, dates, rent. I never thought twice about paying for more than my share. It never even felt like my share, because, in my mind, we were in this together. I wasn't just footing the bill, I was investing in our life. But as I thought about those moments now, the countless times I'd reassured him that it didn't matter who paid, that money didn't define us, I began to see how Jake might feel like he'd never really been in a position to offer something back. To reciprocate the way he wanted. He was relying on me not just for material things but for emotional security, too. And while I'd always assumed he understood the difference, maybe he didn't. Maybe he saw each gesture as another reminder that he couldn't fully support the life we had together. It hit me hard that, despite my reassurances, he might still see himself as a lesser partner, waiting for the day he could finally measure up. It had never occurred to me that this imbalance might be something he carried with him daily. Feeling overshadowed by my career, my finances, and now, my home, I found myself thinking back to the engagement ring. It was beautiful, exactly what I wanted, and I'd been so happy to pay for it myself. I'd never doubted that he'd pay me back once he was on his feet. But suddenly I was questioning if I'd unintentionally set a tone by offering to cover it. What I'd seen as an act of independence, he might have seen as a quiet assertion of control. As though I were saying, I can do this without you. In the moment, I thought I was just doing what made sense. But maybe it had been more complex for him than I'd realized. And then there was the house. The investment I'd worked so hard to make a reality. I'd spent years imagining this moment, the chance to own something. To put down roots in a way that felt permanent and secure. I'd never thought about what it would mean to share that dream with someone who couldn't contribute in the same way. But Jake wanted to be part of it, even if he couldn't contribute financially, because he saw this as a commitment we were making together. To him, it wasn't about the money, it was about a promise. I'd always valued independence. It was how I was raised, taught by my parents to stand on my own 2 feet and never depend on anyone but myself. I'd carried that lesson into every corner of my life. building a career and a financial foundation that gave me a sense of pride and security. But now I was beginning to see that independence could feel like a wall to someone who was trying to meet me in the middle. Especially when I'd always assured him that we were equals. Partners. Late one night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, lingering on pictures from trips we'd taken, milestones we'd celebrated, quiet moments that reminded me of why I'd chosen Jake in the first place. He'd always been kind and supportive, never once resenting me for my success. If anything, he'd been my biggest fan, cheering me on from the sidelines as I reached new heights in my career. He'd reassured me that my ambition and financial stability were strengths, never threats. But now, as I replayed our recent arguments in my mind, I wondered if that dynamic had created an unintended rift between us. I began to ask myself if I'd truly seen Jake as an equal or if, in my pursuit of security, I'd subtly asserted my independence in ways that undermined his sense of worth. Did he see me as his partner? Or did he feel like a guest in a life I'd built without him? These reflections brought back memories from early in our relationship, when he was struggling with his classes and working part-time jobs to cover his tuition. I'd supported him back then because I believed in his potential, because I knew that, in time, he'd find his path and thrive. And even if he hadn't been able to contribute financially, he'd been there for me emotionally, lifting me up when I was stressed, celebrating my successes, and making countless small sacrifices so that we could be together. He was doing his best with what he had, and that had always been enough for me. Until now, I couldn't ignore the nagging thought that maybe I'd been too focused on what I was protecting rather than who I was protecting it for. Jake wasn't asking to own half of everything I'd worked for. He just wanted to feel like he belonged in this chapter we were writing together. He wanted to know that his presence mattered, that he wasn't just a spectator in a life I was leading independently. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe I was the one holding back, afraid to let go of the security I'd clung to for so long. One afternoon, I confided in my best friend, hoping she'd offer some perspective. I told her about the arguments, the sleepless nights, the doubt that had taken root in my mind. She listened patiently, and when I was done, she gave me a look that was both sympathetic and knowing. "You're not wrong to protect yourself, Lisa," she said, "but maybe you're holding on so tightly that you're missing the bigger picture. You and Jake aren't just two individuals anymore. You're about to be married. And maybe that means rethinking what it means to be a team. It's not always about who pays for what or who owns what. Sometimes it's about trust and building something that's bigger than either of you alone." Her words echoed in my mind long after we'd hung up, and for the first time, I began to question the boundaries I'd set. Was I so afraid of losing what I'd built that I was shutting out the person I wanted to share it with? Was my fear of financial vulnerability costing me something even more important, an emotional vulnerability that Jake needed from me just as much? That night, I lay in bed beside Jake, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. And I realized that I'd been so focused on protecting myself that I hadn't considered what I was asking him to sacrifice. He'd always been there for me, despite the imbalance in our finances, giving everything he had in his own way. And maybe it was time for me to give something back, to show him that I wasn't just building a life for myself but a life with him. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my commitment to Jake wasn't just about sharing my successes or covering expenses. It was about creating a space where he felt valued, where he didn't have to question his role in our relationship. I wanted him to feel like an equal, not because of his financial contributions but because he was the person I'd chosen to be my partner. In that moment, I knew that I couldn't keep holding onto my independence as a shield. If I truly wanted Jake to feel like my partner, I needed to show him that I trusted him, that I was willing to make sacrifices for him just as he had for me. And maybe that meant finding a way to include him in the home I was buying. Even if it wasn't on paper. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't solve everything overnight. But I was ready to have a real conversation with Jake, to let go of the barriers I'd built and find a way to make this work. Because in the end, a partnership wasn't just about financial security, it was about trust, love, and the willingness to grow together, even when it meant stepping into the unknown. And as I lay there, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to take that leap. The following evening, I came home determined to have an honest conversation with Jake. I'd thought through so many angles, weighed so many outcomes, but I knew that this needed to be less about logic and more about empathy. We'd hit a crossroads, and I wanted to find a way forward without compromising either of our needs or values. I found him in the kitchen, making dinner. There was a quietness between us that wasn't usually there. We'd both been keeping our distance. Not quite ready to rehash everything yet. But tonight was different. I had spent the entire day thinking about what I wanted to say and knew that the time had come to share it. "Hey, Jake, can we talk?" I asked, coming to sit on a bar stool at the counter. He looked over, a little wary but nodded. "Of course," he said, turning off the stove and joining me. I could see the tension in his eyes, a mixture of hope and uncertainty. I took a deep breath. I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about the house, and, honestly, about how we got here. I realize that I've been so focused on protecting what I've built that I haven't really listened to you. I've been seeing this as a financial decision, but it's about more than that. I didn't see how it was affecting you. And I'm sorry." Jake nodded slowly, his expression softening just a bit. "I know you're just trying to be practical, Lisa, and I get it. I really do. I know how much this means to you. And I'm proud of everything you've worked for. But I want us to be a team. And it's hard to feel that way when it seems like you're keeping me at arm's length." "I don't want you to feel like that," I said, reaching out to take his hand. "I realized something the other day. You've always supported me, even when things were financially unbalanced. And I haven't really given you credit for that. You've been patient and understanding. And I want you to know I appreciate that. I know it hasn't been easy." A small smile tugged at his lips, and he squeezed my hand. "It's never been about the money for me, Lisa. I just want to feel like I'm part of this life we're building. I want to be more than just the guy you're letting live in the house you bought. I want us to share this, in whatever way we can." I felt a surge of emotion, realizing just how much he wanted to feel like an equal, even if he couldn't contribute financially yet. I'd been so fixated on the numbers, on the legalities, that I hadn't acknowledged the emotional investment he'd made in our relationship. He was here, every day, supporting me and rooting for us in ways I'd overlooked. "I've been thinking," I said, hesitating for a moment. "What if we compromise? I know you want to feel like this home is ours, even if you're not on the title right now. So, let's do this. As soon as you're financially stable and the debt is under control, we can revisit adding your name to the title. That way, we're working toward the same goal. But we're also being practical about where we are right now." He listened thoughtfully, his gaze softening as I spoke. "You'd really be open to that?" "Yes," I said, nodding. "I don't want this to be just my house. I want us to share it. But I also want us to do it in a way that protects both of us. And in the meantime, maybe we can start making some of the decisions together. It doesn't have to be on paper yet for you to feel like an equal." Jake's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. "I'd like that. I really would." He paused, looking thoughtful. "How about we create a plan? You know, where we work on our finances together and set some goals. That way, I can feel like I'm contributing, even if it's just in small ways for now." The idea struck me as not only reasonable but also empowering for him. He didn't want to take over or claim ownership, he just wanted a sense of partnership. And I realized, sitting there with him, that this could actually strengthen our bond rather than divide us. "I love that idea," I said, feeling a genuine sense of relief wash over me. "We can budget together, figure out some shared goals, and maybe even plan for a joint investment in the future. Something that's just for us." Jake smiled, his hand still resting warmly in mine. "This feels good, Lisa. I know it'll take time for me to catch up financially. But just knowing that we're working towards something together, that makes all the difference." For the first time in weeks, the tension between us melted away, replaced by a sense of hope and unity. We were finding a way to move forward that honored both of our perspectives. I realized then that being a team wasn't about blending our finances or sharing titles. It was about having each other's backs, especially when things got tough. In that moment, I knew we'd found our footing again. It wasn't a perfect solution, But it was one we could build on. One that allowed us to honor the commitment we'd made to each other without compromising what we each valued. And as we sat there, sketching out our plans and dreaming about our future, I felt a renewed sense of connection, a reminder that love, at its core, is about meeting each other halfway. After that conversation, things felt different between Jake and me. I hadn't realized just how much tension we'd been carrying until it lifted. Our plan wasn't perfect, but it was the first time we'd truly collaborated on our future. Blending his hopes with my need for security, it felt like we were finally on the same team again, working toward a common goal instead of struggling against each other. In the days that followed, we started putting our plan into action. We spent a weekend reviewing his finances and setting up a realistic debt payoff plan. It was eye-opening for both of us. He'd been carrying a heavier burden than I'd realized. And seeing the numbers made it clear why he'd felt so much pressure. But with each adjustment we made, he seemed lighter, more optimistic. I realized that simply having a plan gave him a sense of control he hadn't felt in a long time. At the same time, I opened up more about the financial pressures I faced, explaining how hard I'd worked to build up my savings and why protecting them mattered so much to me. Jake listened intently, and for the first time, I felt like he truly understood. There was no defensiveness, no need for explanations. We were just two people, sharing our fears and finding ways to support each other. We also talked through what sharing our home could look like. Even if he wasn't on the title yet, we agreed to start making joint decisions about the space. Jake, for instance, took over designing the garden, something he'd wanted to do since we first discussed moving in together. He spent hours researching native plants, picking out the perfect flowers and shrubs. I could see how much he loved the process, and it made me so happy to see him engaged in something that felt like a contribution to our home. As we worked together, we stumbled onto a new rhythm. We created a system where he'd contribute what he could to joint expenses, small things like groceries or home improvements, without feeling like he was overextending himself. And to my surprise, it was these small contributions that meant the most to him. He took pride in it, and it gave him a sense of partnership that had been missing. Over the next few months, we became more comfortable discussing financial goals and responsibilities. We even started a joint savings account for our future together. At first, it was only a small amount, but seeing it grow slowly but steadily felt like a testament to our progress. It was a step towards something tangible, a foundation we were building together, brick by brick. Jake's family also noticed the changes. His sister, who'd been one of our strongest supporters, remarked one evening during dinner that she could see how much closer we'd become. She said that watching us work together made her believe even more in what we had. And for the first time in a while, I felt proud, like we were really getting this right. It wasn't always easy, of course. There were still moments when doubt crept in, both for Jake and for me. Sometimes, I'd catch myself worrying about the security of my finances, wondering if I'd made the right decision by letting down my guard. And I knew that Jake, too, had moments when he wondered if he'd ever truly measure up, if he'd ever be able to contribute as much as he wanted. But every time those doubts surfaced, we returned to the commitments we'd made. We'd talk through our fears, sometimes late at night, lying in bed and whispering about everything from student loans to career dreams. It wasn't always a perfect process, but it was honest, and that honesty became the foundation of a trust I hadn't expected. We both knew that this path would require patience, and that if we kept working together, we'd find a way to balance our dreams with the reality of our circumstances. A year after our first conversation about the house, Jake's career took a positive turn. He secured a job in his field, and his income slowly began to rise. Watching his hard work pay off was incredibly rewarding, and I could see how proud he was, not just for himself but for what it meant for us as a couple. He was one step closer to being able to contribute in the ways he'd always wanted. And it gave him a new sense of confidence. As his financial situation improved, we started talking about adding him to the title of our home. By this point, the idea didn't feel threatening or scary. Instead, it felt like a natural step, something we were both ready for. We'd done the work, building a relationship on transparency, shared goals, and compromise, and I finally felt that we were strong enough to take this next step. Looking back on that first difficult conversation, I realized how much we'd both grown. I hadn't just learned to let down my guard, I'd learned the importance of truly listening, of understanding that love is more than just words or intentions. It's about making space for the other person, allowing them to feel valued, even when things aren't easy or convenient. And Jake had learned, too, that being a partner meant being vulnerable, sharing his burdens, and accepting help when he needed it. When we finally made the decision to add him to the title, it was more than just a legal change, it was a symbol of the journey we'd taken together. The struggles and compromises that had brought us closer. And as we signed the paperwork, I knew that this home was no longer just mine or his. It was ours, a place we'd built together in every sense of the word. Now, as I look around the house, the garden Jake designed, the shared bank account we started, the plans we continue to make, I feel a deep sense of peace. We'd faced the hardest questions, had the toughest conversations, and emerged on the other side stronger and more connected. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that we could handle whatever challenges lay ahead. In the end, I'd found what I'd always wanted, a partnership built on trust, respect, and the willingness to grow together. And I knew that as long as we continued to communicate, to support each other, and to work as a team, our future was bright, no matter what twists and turns life might bring. After we signed the paperwork, there was an undeniable shift in our relationship, one that went deeper than titles and property. There was a sense of unity that we hadn't experienced before, a confidence that came from the journey we'd taken together to get here. For the first time, I felt like we were no longer just planning a life together, we were living it. The home felt like a true reflection of our commitment, not just my individual accomplishment. And it was liberating. Jake, too, seemed transformed by this new chapter. Now that he had a sense of ownership in our life together, I noticed him leaning into new responsibilities. He started handling more of the house maintenance, taking pride in keeping things running smoothly. He spent weekends tackling home improvement projects, researching tools and materials, eager to make his mark. I could see that, for him, it wasn't just about being on the title, it was about taking care of something that was now his. 2. One night, as we worked together to put up some new shelves in the living room, I realized how much we'd grown as a team. There was a harmony in the way we collaborated, each of us complementing the other's strengths. When I was unsure about measurements, Jake took over, guiding me through the process. And when he felt out of his element with the decor choices, he let me take the lead. There was a balance between us that hadn't been there before, a sense of trust that felt almost instinctive. With this new confidence, we also began to dream bigger. We talked about future plans that went beyond the walls of our home. Jake shared his ideas about starting his own business once his career was more established. And we began setting aside savings specifically for that goal. It was exciting to think about the possibilities, knowing that we'd created a foundation strong enough to support each other's dreams. I knew that, if he took that leap, I'd be there to catch him. And I also knew that he'd do the same for me. Whenever I needed it, our relationship became about so much more than who paid for what or who earned more. Those concerns, which once seemed so defining, started to fade into the background. They were replaced by a genuine understanding of each other's goals and challenges. We were no longer two individuals trying to merge our lives. We were a true partnership. One that valued the unique contributions we each brought to the table. The changes didn't just impact our relationship with each other but also with our families. Jake's parents, who had once been worried about the imbalance in our relationship, noticed how supportive and connected we'd become. His sister, always our biggest cheerleader, even asked us for advice on managing her own finances with her boyfriend. It felt good to be seen as a strong couple, one that had overcome real challenges to build something meaningful. And then, one day, as we were sitting together in the backyard, Jake brought up the idea of starting a family. The thought of kids had always felt like a someday idea to me. Something that would happen after everything else was perfectly in place. But as he talked about his vision for our future, the idea began to take shape in my mind as something real. Something that felt right. For the first time, I could imagine a family of our own. Kids running through the yard. A future that went beyond just the two of us. The more we talked, the more I realized that I was ready to embrace this next step, not because we were financially prepared, or because it was the right time, but because I knew we had the strength and stability to face whatever came our way. We'd proven to each other that we could navigate life's challenges together. And I knew that with Jake by my side, we could build a family with the same love and resilience that had gotten us this far. In the months that followed, we continued to grow together, learning more about each other's strengths and vulnerabilities. There were still moments of doubt, times when financial stress or career pressures made us question our path. But we always came back to the foundation we'd built, that sense of shared purpose that had brought us through the hardest times. Looking around our home now, I see traces of our journey in every room. The living room shelves we installed together. The garden Jake nurtured with so much care. The plans we've made for a nursery. All of it is a testament to the life we've chosen to create. And in those moments, I feel an overwhelming gratitude for the journey that brought us here. I know there will be more challenges ahead. More decisions that test our partnership. But I also know that we've built something strong enough to weather them. We are more than just a couple with shared financial responsibilities, we are partners. Each bringing our unique strengths to a life we're building together. As I sit beside Jake, watching the sunset from our backyard, I realize that the greatest investment I've made isn't in a house or a career, it's in us. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. We're not just surviving anymore, we're thriving. Together, in a life that is truly ours. A year after that transformative season, our life has found a rhythm that feels stable, yet alive with possibilities. The house, once a symbol of the tension between us, has become a space that reflects both of us, built on compromises and shared memories. Every corner holds a reminder of how far we've come, a journey that was as much about personal growth as it was about finding a way forward together. Looking back, I can see how that struggle over the mortgage and title was about so much more than money. It was about trust, vulnerability, and learning how to build a life that honored both of us. With all our dreams and insecurities, I'm glad we faced it, even with all the hard conversations and uncomfortable truths it required. Without those moments, we might still be living side by side but separate, each of us with one foot out the door. Now, we're solid, we're rooted in this life together, not just as individuals but as partners. Jake has since started his own business. And while it's still small, he's thriving in a way that makes me proud every day. Watching him grow into his own ambitions has reminded me of why I fell in love with him in the first place. And as his confidence has grown, so has his commitment to building our life together. He's no longer simply joining me on a path, he's actively shaping it. Bringing ideas, plans, and dreams to the table. And I've come to appreciate that his contributions, while sometimes less tangible, have been no less valuable. We've talked more seriously about the idea of starting a family. I'm no longer holding on to the need for everything to be perfect before we take that step. Knowing that we've built a foundation that's strong enough to handle the imperfections. We're both ready for the next chapter, whatever it holds, and that sense of readiness has brought a new depth to our relationship. Every so often, I'll remember that younger, more guarded version of myself, the one who was so focused on protecting what I'd built that I almost lost sight of what mattered most. It's a reminder of how easy it is to get lost in the need for security and control, even at the expense of true connection. But I'm grateful for that journey, for all the lessons that came from it. Those struggles have made us stronger, more resilient, and, perhaps most importantly, they've shown us what we're capable of when we face challenges together. Now, as I walk through our home, the one we both fought for, shaped, and invested in, I feel a peace I never knew was possible. The walls hold more than just memories, they hold the proof of our commitment, our willingness to compromise, and our trust in each other. And as we look toward the future, I know that whatever comes our way, we'll find a way through it, together. In the end, it wasn't the house or the title or the money that defined us. It was our choice to stand by each other, to let go of old fears, and to build something beautiful, strong, and lasting. And that's a decision I'll never regret.